Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into what is, without a doubt, the most brutal, devastating, yet entirely world-changing voyage in human history. We always hear about these triumphant explorers, right? But today, we're looking at the dark, gritty reality of exploration. We're going to see exactly how Ferdinand Magellan's expedition completely rewired our history and explore the unbelievable tragedy of the ghost ship that actually made it back, the Victoria.
Let's just talk about the sheer scale of this tragedy for a second. Picture this. It's 1519, and a grand fleet sets sail with about 270 optimistic, ambitious men, all chasing glory and unimaginable riches. Fast forward to September 6, 1522, a single, battered, rotting ship limps back into port in Spain, and on board, just 18 starving, hollow-eyed survivors. That means 252 souls were lost to the sea, disease, violence, and outright starvation. It's just staggering. That lone surviving vessel was the Victoria. But here's the wild part. It wasn't even commanded by Ferdinand Magellan, the guy who started the whole thing. It was led by a Basque navigator named Juan Sebastian Elcano. The Victoria was literally crawling back into port after 3 agonizing years at sea. Just try to imagine the absolute shock of the people standing on those docks in Spain. They're watching these literal skeletal figures stumble off a rotting ship, realizing they somehow achieved the impossible, but at this truly nightmarish cost. So the big question we have to figure out is this. How does an expedition of this incredible magnitude end in such catastrophic ruin, while at the exact same time altering human history forever? The tragedy of the Victoria and the monumental impact of Magellan's voyage are just totally permanently intertwined. Because to understand how we map out our modern connected globe today, we have to understand the absolute nightmare these men sailed through to actually draw those lines.
Section 1. A Defector's Grand Plan.
Okay, so let's set the stage. At this time, the world was quite literally divided in two. The Pope had actually just drawn a line straight down a map, splitting the entire globe between the two massive superpowers of the day, Portugal and Spain. The Treaty of Tordesillas basically said Portugal gets the eastern route around Africa to these super lucrative spice islands in Asia. Now, Ferdinand Magellan, he was a Portuguese noble, a seasoned combat veteran, but his own king, Manuel I, just kept rejecting him. So what does Magellan do? He defects. He literally changes his name to the Spanish Fernando de Magallanes and pitches a wildly radical idea to the young King Charles I of Spain. He says, look, don't go east. Let's sail west. Let's go entirely around the South American continent to claim the Spice Islands from the other side, proving they belong in Spain's half of the world. Crazy, right?
Well, King Charles was all in on this massive gamble. He gave Magellan the Armada de las Moluccas. This wasn't some small trip. This was a formidable fleet of 5 heavily armed ships. You had the Trinidad, which was Magellan's flagship, the San Antonio, the absolute behemoth of the fleet, the Conception, a small scout ship called the Santiago, and finally, the Victoria, which, as we know, would be the only one to make it back. 270 men, 5 massive ships, heading straight off the map into the total unknown.
Section 2. Mutiny and the Maze.
Almost immediately, things start going horribly wrong. It's a rapid-fire succession of disasters. Tensions are already sky-high because, these proud Spanish captains deeply resent taking orders from a Portuguese commander. So they hit the freezing, brutal winter in southern Argentina, and boom, full-blown mutiny erupts. Magellan's response? Absolutely ruthless. He executes one captain and straight-up maroons another on the desolate, freezing coast just to get people back in line. Shortly after that, the scout ship Santiago gets completely destroyed in a violent storm. And as if things couldn't get any worse, while they are carefully, desperately navigating these terrifyingly narrow straits at the tip of South America, what we call the Strait of Magellan today, the largest ship, the San Antonio, just bails. They desert. They literally turn around, flee back to Spain, and they take a massive chunk of the fleet's vital food and supplies with them. So now they're down to just 3 ships, and they are bleeding supplies. But they push through, and on November 28, 1520, they finally navigate that treacherous strait and emerge into this vast, wide-open ocean. Magellan is so relieved to be out of those violent storms that he optimistically names this massive body of water the Mar Pacifico, or the Peaceful Sea, which, we know today as the Pacific Ocean. But calling it peaceful was a cruel, cruel irony. This crossing, this is where the defining tragedy for the crew of the Victoria and the remaining fleet really sets in. See, Magellan had fatally underestimated just how gigantically massive the Pacific actually is. For nearly 4 agonizing months, they sail without spotting a single piece of land to resupply. Nothing. Provisions are completely gone. The men are literally reduced to eating sawdust off the floorboards, hunting down diseased ship rats, and boiling strips of leather torn straight off the ship's rigging just to have something, anything in their stomachs. And then scurvy hits. It absolutely ravages the crew, swelling their gums, rotting their bodies, and killing over 20 men. The so-called peaceful sea basically became a floating graveyard.
Section 3. Death in the Philippines.
After a super quick resupply in Guam, the desperate fleet finally reaches the Philippines. Here, Magellan actually manages to form a fast alliance with a local ruler named Raja Humabon. But then, Magellan makes a fatal mistake. Maybe he was emboldened by having just survived the impossible Pacific crossing, but he grows dangerously overconfident, arrogant even. He offers to completely crush a rival local chief named Lapu-Lapu on the neighboring island of Mactan. His own officers are begging him not to do this. But Magellan takes a tiny force of just 49 men, completely convinced that their European armor and firearms would basically make them invincible.
While that military blunder at Mactan unfolded into a complete and total tactical collapse. First of all, the Spanish ships couldn't even get close to the shore because of all these shallow coral reefs. That made their heavy cannons, which was literally their only real tactical advantage, were totally useless. So, step 2, they have to wade ashore right into the water to face an overwhelming force of over 1,500 highly motivated local warriors. And step 3, those warriors were smart. They quickly realized the Spaniards had armored torsos but completely exposed, unarmored legs. So, they ruthlessly targeted their attacks right there. It was a bloodbath.
The commander's luck had finally permanently run out. Magellan was struck in the leg by a poisoned arrow. Realizing they were completely overrun, he ordered a retreat and actually bravely stayed behind in the surf, fighting just to cover his fleeing men. But he was surrounded. He was struck down by spears and cutlasses in the shallow waters of Mactan. His body was claimed by the sea and the victors, and to this day it was never recovered. The visionary behind this entire grandiose grand plan was dead, thousands and thousands of miles from home.
Section 4. A world changed forever.
And somehow, the tragedy only compounded from here. The surviving crew was now so heavily depleted by starvation, scurvy, and battle that they physically didn't have enough men to sail 3 ships, so they had to make the agonizing choice to just burn the Conception right there in the water. Later on, the flagship Trinidad tries to sail back across the Pacific but gets captured by their bitter rivals, the Portuguese, and that left only one single ship, the Victoria, now under the command of Juan Sebastian Elcano, sailing entirely alone across the vast Indian Ocean, desperately trying to round the southern tip of Africa just to get back home.
And yet, by somehow miraculously surviving the Indian Ocean and returning to Spain, the Victoria achieved something completely unprecedented. This is exactly how the voyage changed history forever. Think about it. Before 1519, the world was basically a theoretical map, right? It was divided up by treaties, but wildly, totally misunderstood in its actual dimensions. But after the Victoria's return in 1522, humanity had just achieved its very first global circumnavigation. They had physically, undeniably proven that the oceans were connected. And more importantly, they revealed the true massive scale of planet Earth. The Pacific Ocean wasn't some myth anymore. It was a known, mapped reality. The world was suddenly fundamentally so much larger than anyone in Europe had ever dreamed. Which really brings us to a final lingering question. As we look back at those 18 hollow-eyed survivors staggering off the rotting wood of the Victoria, carrying the knowledge that literally reshaped human understanding, we have to ask ourselves, was the dawn of our connected global history worth the horrific tragedy and unimaginable human cost they endured? The maps we use today were quite literally drawn with the ink of their suffering. It's a heavy, heavy legacy to consider, and one that absolutely redefines how we look at the age of exploration. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and honestly, I hope this gives you a whole new perspective the very next time you look at a globe.